Yes?
Would a child who did not grow up in a two-parent family lack the Oedipus complex and other normal stages of development?
It's an excellent question. The question is that the conflicts and psychosexual development that Freud describes is always assumes that a child has a mother and a father, one of each, in a certain sort of familial structure. And the question then is, what if a child was raised by a single parent, for example? What if a child was never breastfed, but fed from the bottle from the start? And Freudians have had problems with this. Freud was very focused on the family life of the people he interacted with, which is rather upper-class Europeans. And these sort of questions would have been difficult for Freud to answer. I imagine that what a Freudian would have to say is you would expect systematic differences. So you would expect a child who just grew up with a mother, or just grew up to be a father, with a father, to be in some sense psychologically damaged by that, failing to go through the normal psychosexual stages. Yes?
Do modern psychodynamic therapists still believe that women don't have super egos?
The question is, do modern psychoanalysts still believe that women do not have superegos? Freud was, as you're pointing out, Freud was notorious for suggesting that women were morally immature relative to men. I think Freud would say that women had superegos. They're just not the sort of sturdy ones that men have. I think psychoanalysts and psychoanalytic scholars right now would be mixed. Some would maintain that there really are deep sex differences. Others would want to jettison that aspect of Freudian theory. Yes?
You define sublimation as being a displacement. Does that make it sort of a subgroup of displacement?
Well, what sublimation is, a lot of these, it's a good question. The question is to sort of what is sublimation? How does it relate to the other defense mechanisms? A lot of defense mechanisms involve taking a desire and turning it. Now, what displacement does is it takes it from you to her. Like, I'm angry at you, but maybe that's forbidden for some reason, so I'll be angry at her. What projection does is takes a desire from me and then puts it on somebody else heading outwards. And what sublimation does is it just gives up the details and keeps the energy. So you stay up, you know, your roommate stays up all night working. And you say to your roommate, for instance, that's just because you haven't had sex in a long time. And you want to have sex, so you devote all your energy to your math exam. And then you say, that's sublimation. I learned that in intro psych. And your roommate may be very pleased. One more question. Yes?
What kind of evidence is there for cross-cultural validity?
The question is, which is related to the issue, extending the issue of the two-parent versus one-parent family, is to what extent are these notions validated cross-culturally? And that's such a good question, I'm going to defer, I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes, because that speaks to the issue of the scientific assessment of Freud. So I'm going to try to get to your question in a little bit. Freudian theory is now, at this point in time, extremely controversial. And there's a lot of well-known criticisms and attacks on Freud. This is just actually an excellent book on the memory wars by Frederick Crews, and Frederick Crews is one of the strongest and most passionate critics of Freud. And the problems with Freud go like this. There are two ways you could reject a theory. There are two problems with a scientific theory. One way you could reject a theory is that it could be wrong. So suppose I have a theory that the reason why some children have autism, a profound developmental disorder, is because their mothers don't love them enough. This is a popular theory for many years. It's a possible theory, it just turns out to be wrong. But another way, and so one way to attack and address a scientific theory is to view it as just to see whether or not it works. But there's a different problem a theory could have. A theory could be so vague and all-encompassing that, that it can't even be tested. And this is one of the main critiques of Freud. The idea could be summed up by a quotation from the physicist Wolfgang Pauli. And Pauli was asked his opinion about another physicist. And Pauli said this: "That guy's work is crap. He's not right. He's not even wrong." And the criticism about Freud is that he's not even wrong. The issue of vagueness is summarized in a more technical way by the philosopher Karl Popper, who introduced the term of falsifiability. The idea of falsifiability is that what distinguishes science from non-science is that scientific predictions make strong claims about the world, and these claims are of a sort that they could be proven wrong. If they couldn't be proven wrong, they're not interesting enough to be science. So, for example, within psychology, the sort of claims we'll be entertaining throughout the course include claims like damage to the hippocampus causes failures of certain sorts of memory. Or everywhere in the world, men, on average, want to have more sexual partners than women. Or exposure to violent television tends to make children themselves more violent. Now, are they true or are they false? Well, we'll talk about that. But the point here is they can be false. They're interesting enough that they can be tested. And as such, they might be wrong, but they graduate to the level of a scientific theory. This should be contrasted with non-scientific programs, and the best example of a non-scientific program is astrology. So the problem with astrological predictions is not that they're wrong, it's that they can't be wrong. They're not even wrong. I got my horoscope for today on the web. A couple of negative aspects could make you a little finicky for the next few days. Okay, I want to watch for that. The presence of both Mars and Venus suggests you want to box everything into a neat, ordered, structured way, but keeping a piece of jade or carnelian close will help you keep in touch with your fun side. And starting this morning, I got for my wife a little piece of jade, and I have been sort of in touch with my fun side. The problem is, a few days aren't going to go by. I said, God, that was wrong. It can't be wrong. It's just so vague. I got a better horoscope from The Onion, actually. Riding in a golf cart with snow cone in hand, you'll be tackled by 2 police officers this week after matching a composite caricature of a suspected murderer. Now, that's a good prediction, because wow, if it turns out to be true, I'm going to say those guys really know something. It's falsifiable. Arguably, Freud fails the test, because Freudian theory is often so vague and flexible that it can't really be tested in any reliable way. A big problem of this is a lot of Freudian theory is claimed to be validated in the course of psychoanalysis. So when you ask people, why do you believe in Freud? They won't say, oh, because of this experiment, this data set, and that data set. What they'll say is, the Freudian theory proves itself in the course of psychoanalysis, the success of psychoanalysis. But it's unreliable. I mean, the problem is, say, Freud says to a patient, you hate your mother. The patient says, wow, that makes sense. Freud says, I'm right. Freud says, you hate your mother. The patient says, no, I don't. It's terrible. That's disgusting. Freud says, your anger shows this idea is painful for you. You repressed it from time. I am right. And the problem is, the same sort of dynamic plays itself out even in the scientific debate back and forth. So Freudian psychologists, I'm putting Freud here, but what I mean is well-known defenders of Freud, will make some claims like, adult personality traits are shaped by the course of psychosexual development, all dreams are disguised wish fulfillment, psychoanalysis is the best treatment for mental disorders. Scientists will respond, I disagree, there's little or no evidence supporting those claims, and the Freudian response is, your rejection of my ideas shows that they are distressing to you. This is because I am right. And this is often followed up. Seriously enough, you have deep psychological problems. And now I don't want to caricature Freudians, a lot of Freudians have tried and made a research program of extending their ideas scientifically, bringing them to robust scientific tests. But the problem is, when you make specific falsifiable predictions, they don't always do that well. So for instance, there's no evidence that oral and anal characteristics, the personality characteristics I talked about being needy versus being stingy, relate in any interesting way to weaning or toilet training. And there's been some efforts cross-culturally, to go back to the question this young man asked before, looking at cross-cultural differences in toilet training and weaning, which are really big differences, to see if they correspond in any interesting way to personality differences, and there's been no good evidence supporting that. Similarly, Freud had some strong claims about sexuality for why some people are straight and others are gay. These have met with very little empirical support. And the claim that psychoanalysis proves itself by its tremendous success in curing mental illness is also almost certainly not true. For most, maybe not all, but for most psychological disorders, there are quicker and more reliable treatments than psychoanalysis. And there's considerable controversy as to whether the Tony Soprano method of insight, where you get this insight and this discovery, oh, now I know, makes any real difference in alleviating symptoms such as anxiety disorders or depression. This is why there's often a sticker shock when people go to a university psychology department, where they say, look, hey, so I'm in how can I take classes on Freud? Who's your expert on Freud? And the truth is, Freudian psychoanalysis is almost never studied inside psychology departments. Not the cognitive or developmental side, not the clinical side. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, even the people who do study Freud within psychology departments do so critically. Very few of them would see themselves as a psychoanalytic practitioner or as a Freudian psychologist.